From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he normally does as Andre Johnson Jr. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. We have reached the middle of the week. It is hump day. It's been a busy week this week for it only being Wednesday. A lot of different sports coming together here in the Fox 8 Sports office. And wouldn't you know it, the Monday signing to the Tuesday medical update to now the Wednesday contract update. We have now had another twist and turn in the Chase Young joining the New Orleans Saints saga, if you will, and that's where we're going to start with our big picture here today.
Absolutely. We got a lot more context when it comes to this Chase Young signing. It was reportedly 1 year, $13 million initially. Now we find out it's really about $5 million, and that $8 million on top of that, that's going to come from bonuses. So Chase Young is going to get $470,000 a game, which adds up, if he plays all 17, to that $8 million. You add that on top of the $5 million, that's where that initial $13 million number comes from. Now, there is a bit of a caveat there. The only way it's truly 1 year, $13 million, is if Young gets released. If Chase Young gets released for whatever reason, he does get all of the $13 million. But if not, if he is on this roster from now until the end of the regular season, he has to earn the $13 million. He's only getting $5 million. He has to earn the other $8 million. Now, knowing that, does that change how you view this Chase Young signing?
Okay. Well, first of all, this has been an amazing 3 days when it comes to one player's signing to start the second week of free agency. First off, shout out to Kai Harley. I thought I knew all your little tricks when it came to structuring contracts and what sort of thing you can do to kind of get things working to where you're able to, I guess, land the player and also cover the Saints in the process. How many swings and emotion can I have since this signing has happened? First off, we did a podcast on it, had an initial high level of excitement for adding a player of Chase Young's caliber, 24 years old, premier position of need at a position you don't normally get the second week of free agency. We went over all this, especially at 24 years old, but I think you're seeing now why there was a reason why he was available, because there were certain health concerns. And look, the second day on Tuesday, look, I'm on the radio. I'm doing the Sports Hangover show with Gus Kattengill, and we start the interview off. He asks me about Chase Young. I'm talking about it. I don't see how you can be mad at this. This is a great signing. This is fantastic. I mean, this is a great move by the Saints. The end of the interview is when news breaks that he's having the neck surgery and may not be available until the start of the regular season. So I ended the interview with well, all that excitement I had to start this interview, I mean, let's just hope he's ready to start because by the start of the season, because that would really be a bummer to really have to invest in this player and have him not be available. To now today, I'm kind of back in the middle. Now you see the details of what the contract is, and you knew the Saints when it comes to this kind of stuff. They understand how to structure a contract and understand the health concerns. And this goes to show you that, indeed, they knew all about the neck situation. But let me ask you this, Andre.
Yes.
Would people, myself included, have reacted the way we all did Tuesday if the initial report was 1 year, $5 million, worth up to $13 million? Would there have been such a strong, I think it would have been an incredible reaction on Monday, and perhaps the Tuesday reaction wouldn't have been quite as negative had that popped up.
I agree. I think a lot of the positive would have still been there, but the negative, I know from my point of view, it definitely wouldn't have been there. Because on Monday when we talked about this, my first question was, well, why is it only $1 million? You're signing this guy to essentially approve a deal. At least that's what we thought at the time. 1 year, $13 million. I'm thinking you're getting a 24-year-old pass rusher who's coming in healthy off of a pretty good season last year. He proves it, and now you've got to negotiate with that guy to hopefully stay here compared to other places where he could probably get more money. That's where I was on Monday. So now knowing that, I think it was an incredible deal for the Saints. They did a great job in protecting themselves. It helps you kind of see why a 24-year-old pass rusher who was seen as generational coming out of Ohio State was still available in week 2 of free agency. It makes you see why, he was only scheduled to have 3 visits, one with the Saints, one with the Panthers, one with the Titans. 3 teams who weren't in the playoffs.
And let me
last
just
year.
jump in there because I think you see why he had to take visits.
Yeah.
I think medical staffs wanted to get their look at him. Wanted to get a look at where Chase Young certainly was. I mean, because if there was health concerns, and this is well known in terms of him having to have neck surgery once he hit the market. Now you're because we saw it first 2 days of free agency. Guys weren't taking visits; they were signing with other clubs. Chase Young had to take the visit route the second week of free agency before he signed that contract.
Exactly. And that's what kind of threw me off because I was like, man, Chase Young leaving San Francisco, great defense. They were just in the Super Bowl. You'd think he'd get more looks. So now when that hit on Tuesday, I was like, it all makes sense now. The Saints, again, you're taking a chance with a guy, but it's only $5 million that you're giving him, the $8 million he has to earn. So you understand that. You're protecting yourselves. And again, still, if he is able to come back, have a healthy season, you still have the ability to negotiate a longer-term deal. My question now is, another thing we talked about on Monday is, the impact that he could have. I was thinking, Chase Young is for sure your day one starter. So now you've got to choose between Cam Jordan. You've got Carl Granderson, who was arguably the best player on the defense last year. You've got still Peyton Turner, Tano Passignon. You've got Isaiah Foskey, who you drafted last season. You got a lot of people in that defensive end pass rusher situation who only really 2 guys are going to start. Now knowing this, what would you kind of expect the impact?
Well,
of Chase Young to be?
let me start by saying this. First off, the Saints covered themselves.
Yeah.
The Saints covered themselves. We know that this is only a guaranteed contract. If he plays all of the games, he gets all this money, or if he gets cut, he ain't getting cut. They're not cutting him. We know this. They're not going to cut the guy because they would have to pay him a lot of money to cut him, and then he's not going to get all the money unless he's fully active on game day each and every week. So if he's on IR, he don't get the money that week. If he's on PUP, he don't get the money that week. So clearly, it is in his best interest to be healthy and be active each and every week. And look, he agreed to this. He agreed to this, so he understands where he's at, and he understands the motivation for him to get healthy. So this now looks like, in my opinion, a fairly low risk on the Saints side with a potential high reward when you talk about a player of Chase Young's caliber, a player who at one point his ceiling looked really high at a premier position, and you're only investing upfront $5 million, and then you're kind of going to pay as you go if he's available week in and week out. So I do think from the Saints' perspective, they really covered themselves and protected themselves to in this investment with, I guess you could call it a medically risky player, maybe a cautious player, if you can go down that road. So that's all good. But the point is not to protect yourself. The point is to get a good player, a good impact player. So, and the crux of the issue, the crux of the concern is still very much there. Chase Young has to get neck surgery, which seems like a pretty significant surgery. I mean, I recall, man, was it Peyton Manning? He had to have the neck surgery towards the end of the year. But towards the end of his career, he said last couple of years of his career, he couldn't feel the football. Like you're dealing with nerves back there. You're dealing with things could go wrong, even if the surgery is clean. There could be a lingering issue, and does it impact his availability week in and week out? And is he available enough on a consistent basis to impact games and help this team win more games? That's ultimately what it's all about. I mean, it's ultimately what it's all about. So what kind of impact can he have? Well, of course, if he's healthy, he can have a great impact. And I think if he's healthy, he's starting.
Yes.
But if he's not healthy, or if he's consistently up and down with his availability, maybe that starting spot isn't guaranteed because you're not paying him like a guarantee. He's got to be on the field every single time if he's up and down availability wise. Now, if he's consistently available, he's starting. It's just that simple until he proves he's no longer productive. So all in all, it feels like if this all would have come out right when the signing happened, the actual details of the contract, the actual details of the medical situation he was dealing with, I think by now everybody would have processed it and understood the situation and be like, yeah, you know what? That's worth the risk. I think that's where I land on this. He is worth the risk, but there is still a risk. And I'm very curious and conscious of this neck surgery. Like, we're not talking about a knee or an ankle. We're talking about a neck, and you're playing a defensive end position. And I don't know about you, but I was initially off the idea of them going edge pass rusher. But as more details in the draft, more details have come out, I don't think you can completely take that off the table anymore, especially if there's a risk to him health-wise and you're not sure where he's at from a timetable standpoint.
I agree, because that was also one of the first things that I thought of when they signed Chase Young was, oh, man, we've been talking all spring and all winter about the Saints need a pass rusher. You know, they need somebody who can get after the quarterback. That pick 14 that they have in the draft, we're looking at guys. We talked about maybe they can draft, trade back, still get a Chop Robinson or, Jared Verse, somebody who maybe fits their need, but you can get them maybe in the 20s. Now you're looking at it and you're like, man, okay, maybe they're still in that ballpark to draft somebody at that position, because Chase Young, high reward, very low risk. In a perfect world, they say that it's been reported he's supposed to be back for training camp. So in a perfect, or he misses training camp, he's back by the start of the season. So in a perfect world, you get him, he plays 17 games, he impresses you. You impress Chase Young, because it's also important to impress Chase Young, because after that 1-year deal, he's got to choose to stay here, which, I mean, if that defense has a good year, the Saints have a good year, you've got Dennis Allen, a defensive coach. Defensive players appreciate that. You've got a spot in Cam Jordan's defensive end spot that, Cam Jordan, he's not going to play forever. You can easily slide Chase Young there if you don't slide him across from Cam Jordan and move somebody else there eventually. But, yeah, I agree. When you look in the draft, I was starting to think, man, maybe Brock Bowers might be the move. Yeah. Maybe they do trade back and maybe opt for some help on that offensive line. But, yeah, now defensive end, I agree. It's got to still be in play.
Yeah, there's a couple things there as well. First off, in a perfect world, he's healthy and he's motivated. He is motivated. He has financial incentive to be healthy.
Yeah.
So that's good. That's a good thing. You want to, so if he's close to being ready to go, he's going to go because his money depends on it. B, he's motivated by having a great year, gets the big money contract, and having, whether that's with New Orleans or whoever. And ultimately, I would think that's what Chase Young eventually wants, is to get the big money edge pass rusher type contract that the big dogs do get in the NFL. So, but the bottom line is simply this: if this doesn't work and this kind of crumbles and it ends up being another Marcus Davenport type situation, although not quite as bad because you're not investing nearly what you invested in Marcus Davenport for a Chase Young, people aren't going to remember, well, the Saints really protected themselves with this contract. They're going to remember another investment in defensive end didn't work out. So, yeah, there's a risk, and there's always going to be a little bit of, let's see how it plays out, a little bit of hesitancy from certain people, or a little bit of, Monday morning quarterbacking if it doesn't work out. But if you're the Saints, this is still a risk worth taking because of the way the contract is structured. And if everything happens the way it's supposed to happen, you have upgraded the position, even if he doesn't live up to the second overall pick, but he's still a productive guy giving you 7.5 to 8 sacks. To me, that's worth the investment.
Yeah.
That's worth the investment for 1 year, because ultimately him being on the field for more than he's not on the field, getting that type of impact would help the Saints win games, which is ultimately what it's all about.
I agree. The Saints were ranked 28th in the league in sacks last year. So even if you bring in a Chase Young, who maybe isn't 100%, say he's 70%, 65%, and he can give you 6, 7, 8.5 sacks, that's good. You'll take that. It's better than you were last year, where you were at the bottom of the league when it came to pressuring the passer. Now, we talked about the new guy that they brought in. The Saints also retained two of their defensive backs. Ugo Amadi, Jonathan Abram, 2 DBs, still in black and gold. Ugo Amadi played cornerback, a lot of special teams. Abram, a little bit of safety, special teams as well. Neither guy may be expected to start, but just seeing them continue to not only add depth, but really maintain depth. Guys who are familiar.
That's really what it's all about. These are the only 2 guys that they've brought back, only unrestricted guys that they've brought back so far. They have their own unrestricted free agents. There could be more. Even by the time you see this podcast, there could be more. Like both those players, Ugo Amadi was the guy that filled in at that nickel position. He played some special teams. He can give you safety help in a pinch, but more often than not, he's going to be sort of that backup nickel, sort of 4th or 5th cornerback, if you will. Jonathan Abram was on the practice squad for a lot of last year, and then he got into the active roster and really played well towards the end of the season. In fact, we mentioned him in our last pod about how they could potentially address the safety position because you got Tyron, you got Jordan Howden, you got JT Gray, who's a special teams guy. You need somebody else back there. And Jonathan Abram, to me, he can give you what Marcus May gave you. He could give you what Marcus May gave you for way less money.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen the financial terms of the deal, but it's not going to break the bank. I can promise you that. And these are two more guys that signed one-year deals, which means every single person that has signed a contract with the Saints, it's all been on one-year deals, except for Cedric Wilson, the 2-year contract for the wide receiver. So I like the addition. I think it keeps the secondary in place from a depth standpoint. You lost Isaac Yiadom, and obviously you cut Marcus May, so you lost those two guys. But I do think, and we don't know what's going to happen with Marshawn Lattimore, and we'll see what happens after the draft, I guess. But I like both additions. Quietly, those are the good kind of depth glue guys that I think you really need, just because you just don't know when those guys are going to come in handy. Like I think of Jonathan Abram in that Tampa Bay game. I think Ugo Amadi filled in a pinch many a times when in-game injuries. So I like the idea of bringing both those guys back.
Yeah, Ugo Amadi, he had an interception in the preseason.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Abram, he's what you call a thumper. He's a guy who when the other team is running the ball, he can come down, he can make the big hits. He had an impact in that Tampa game, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
The Atlanta game, he played well in the Atlanta game as well. And again, neither of these re-signings are going to necessarily wow the fans. Like, it's not, Ugo Amadi, he's at best, the 4th or 5th string cornerback.
Exactly, right.
When you look at safety, the gap where Marcus May left, it's most likely going to be, at least as of right now, assuming no other free agents or draft picks are signed, Jordan Howden that steps into that spot, which you would expect from the rookie drafted last season. But having depth is important. Having veterans in the locker room is important. Having guys who are familiar with Dennis Allen, familiar with the way that this defense does things, that is important, especially when you've got young guys like Jordan Howden out there, when you've got young guys like Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor in that secondary. So I'm not necessarily as excited from these guys are going to make so many plays on the field, but just their presence and what they bring to this team as veterans. I think that a lot of times in sports that goes unstated or it gets undervalued, but this move from the Saints shows that that is important to them, and that is why I like these two re-signings.
Yeah, and football more than any other sport is where you need these kind of guys, because there's such a fluctuation between offense, defense, and special teams, and how many guys you need, and the injury rate is so high. So if you're around the sport a lot, you're around the Saints a lot, you understand why these kind of signings really make a lot of sense, and these are the types of signings that really can help stabilize a program. Also, this DA ain't letting that secondary slip, man. DA, if there's one thing DA is going to have, is going to be a good defensive backfield. He was a former DB coach, a former secondary coach. He is not letting his secondary slip. That's part of who he is as a coach. That's the one area I can guarantee you he is not going to let slip when it comes to his Saints team and his Saints defense. Whew. Man, we've had a week thus far. I would imagine you'll have a few more of their own guys pop up in terms of free agent signings to fill things out. And then I think pretty quickly here, probably by the end of next week, because I go to NFL owners meetings next Monday and Tuesday. We'll have a chance to talk to Dennis Allen in Orlando. I would think you'll see a pivot to the draft coming fairly soon. So I think overall, it's not free agency, certainly not over, and it's not going to be over. But I think overall, the bulk of the work is probably going to shift here into pro days and the draft coming up pretty soon.
Absolutely. And it's important to keep in mind, this is a roster that a lot of fans liked. This is a roster that many people thought would win the NFC South last year. And on defense, you haven't lost any starters for the most part, other than Marcus May.
Yeah.
But for the most part, this defense is still intact. And they've added a Chase Young. We'll see what his impact is moving forward. They bring in a Willie Gay, who obviously will, between Pete Werner, Demario Davis, we'll see how much playing time he gets, but I think he'll be very important in certain packages, and especially when it comes to playing against mobile quarterbacks, because that was one of his specialties in Kansas City. You're bringing in depth. I think the Saints so far, they haven't. We talked about the splash on Monday. The splash, it might be a ripple now.
Kind of tempered splash there.
Might be a little bit of a ripple now that we know the injury situation with Chase Young, but this team hasn't gotten worse. I believe they've made small steps toward getting better, and they can make a leap come draft time.
Yeah, I'm going to give it like we said last pod, I'm going to give it on the slight lean on the positive scale in terms of getting better when you compare their losses to their gains up to this point, and we'll see how they handle the NFL draft. Anything else for us today?
I'm good, Sean.
Andre Johnson Jr. is good. I am good. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.